Welcome to Brave New Us, where we explore what it means to be human in the age of biotechnology. Today I'm here with Dr. Stacy Trasancos, a chemist and theologian who brings a rare dual perspective to some of the most charged questions in bioethics. She is the author of IVF is Not the Way, a bold and deeply reasoned critique of in vitro fertilization and what it reveals about how we view life, love, and human dignity. What happens when technology takes the place of relationships? What do we risk when children are made instead of begotten? And how can science and faith work together to uphold the dignity of every human life? We spoke last in season 2, episode 5, where we discussed vaccines derived from fetal tissue and other aspects of embryonic research. I highly recommend revisiting that episode as it provides a valuable context for today's conversation. Dr. Trasancos, welcome back to Brave New Us.
Hello, thank you so much for having me back and just for being a voice out there in general in favor of human dignity and bioethics.
Yeah, thank you. Your book, IVF is Not the Way, takes a hard stance in a space filled with heartbreak and hope. What motivated you to write it now?
President Donald Trump. um, just to get right to the point, I'm not a very political person, but we all heard him say during his campaign that he promised to make IVF more available. And, among conservative circles, that was hailed as a good thing. It was seen as very positive. And it occurred to me then that the number of people in the United States who are against IVF is probably far smaller than the number of people who are against abortion.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about a steep hill to climb. And so when he won the presidency, then Sophia Institute Press talked to me and asked me if I'd be willing to write a book on this issue. I hadn't planned to, but yeah, it matters. And so I got the book written in a month, and they got it turned around and published within the 90-day review period that he called for. So that is unheard of. That was definitely a feat for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, publishing usually moves at this glacial pace. Years to write and then years to get it edited and published and everything. So in a month, my goodness, what a whirlwind.
Yeah, it was fun. I liked doing it that way because I just kind of I work at home, like a lot of people do these days. And I told my husband, he was behind it. He said, let's do this. So he sort of took on everything else for the month. He's retired. And I just isolated in my office and started writing and plowed through it. And then we went on vacation to Belize for 10 days. The first time in 19 years we've had a vacation, just the two of us. And when I got back from vacation on the plane, they sent me the corrected edit. So I had like a week after that to go through the edits, but it was fun. It was a good time.
It was a good way to celebrate it being done. Well, I have to say I've read it and it does not read like something that was written that quickly. It is so well researched, so in depth. I mean, you really capture just in such a great way, like such a human way, but also intellectually all the different facets of this issue. So I want to hopefully go through some of those in the interview. But if you were advising President Trump right now, you're called in, what would be your policy recommendations that you would be in there advising him, asking, insisting on?
Yeah, the number one, and that's where the title came from. I would say IVF is not the way to solve the low birth rate problem in the United States. It's not something that's going to have a big pharma fix to it. This issue is much deeper than hormone injections and assisted reproductive technologies, which puts a lot of money in my opinion, the wrong people's pockets. This is a solution that gets at the very heart of what it means to be human, what it means to be married, what it means to be a family, what it means to accept children as gifts. And as a society, we need to get our heads around what it means to say that children are gifts. We need to view them as gifts, not just in the family, but in the whole society. And that's how you build a better society. And it's going to take more than executive orders and edicts and changing of funding, but it'll reorient the way we view humanity. And of course, I would say that money needs to go towards research that um, assist in healing infertility, but doesn't replace the conjugal act. And we can get into what that means.
Sure, yeah. And then we also have an episode out this season with Grace Stark, the editor of Natural Womanhood, who dives deep into restorative reproductive medicine as a real healing alternative to what is being offered, the technological hijacking that's happening in IVF. So, how do you respond to those who say that IVF is just another medical advancement like antibiotics or organ transplants? And why do you think it's fundamentally different?
That is one of the, I mean, first of all, I had the same question, like not just ask, I know you know the answer to this, and I wasn't just asking it like, I seriously had that question, like, because I'm a convert, and I thought, what, good grief, what's wrong with that? It's bringing more babies into the world. And and that is a good question. Like, how is it different from any other medical technology? It's different because it is about the cooperation with God of bringing a new human into existence. So, because we're talking about conception, we're talking about the beginning of a new human life, because that is so important. And if people don't understand why being human is so important and so unique, you miss this point, like I did. Because we're talking about a baby, we have to insist that that baby be born of the most intimate love possible. I mean, that's what the church says. Don't break the most intimate love there is for the baby. And of course, it gets broken all the time, but the church says the child has a right to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you say it gets broken all the time, you mean that conception happens outside of those things, but there's a maybe fundamental difference between things that happen unintentionally versus intentionally severing that relationship.
Yeah, and the church's core teaching here is the principle, I call it the principle of inseparability. But what it means is you can't separate the unitive and the procreative aspect of the conjugal act. That's theology speak, because that hardly even makes sense to a lot of Catholics, much less non-Catholics. Like, what is unitive and procreative, and what do you mean by conjugal act? It means that in sex, in marriage, you cannot separate love making and life giving. The life giving of your child has to be done within the context of your love making. When I started writing the book, I'm like, people who are not Catholic and already know these things, that is going to be a hard sell. Like, good, like, again, conservatives who are already against abortion, they're not going to understand that the child has a right to be born of marital love. So children have a right to be born within marriage, and not just within a marriage, but over there in a petri dish in the lab, within marriage that is united body and soul, bodily unity and spiritual unity. And so the church says children have a right to that, and therefore the church cannot say it's licit to break that unity. And that I think that is a really hard thing to teach to
Yeah,
people.
for sure. So why do you say that IVF violates the rights of a child?
Yes. And that is, it actually says that in the catechism, and it says it in Donum Vitae. Like, I had never seized on that point before. But when people say, well, you're against IVF, you must be saying my child is, somehow unworthy, or something's wrong with my child because of the way he or she was conceived. No, the church is actually speaking to the humanity of that child, that child and all children have a right to be born of intimate unity of love, but conjugal love, to be born of, they have a right to be conceived in love. And by conceived in love, we mean bodily and spiritual. So there have been, even when Donum Vitae came out in the late 1980s, there were theologians in the church who argued that IVF still meets that criteria, because even though the couple, like for example, they call it the simple case IVF, remove all the issues about embryos in storage or embryos being killed or donor embryos and eggs. Just say you have a married couple who's committed and they are infertile and they want to conceive a child, and they're not going to use a donor egg, they're not going to use donor sperm, they're only going to fertilize one egg, they're only going to bring one embryo into being by IVF. And otherwise, spiritually, they're united. They're going to commit to this child. They have a strong marriage. They otherwise, than this one event, they have a bodily unity in their marriage. It's just this one time they want to try to conceive that embryo in the lab. The church looked at all of that, removing all the other questions, and said no, still no, because that child that's going to be conceived has a right to be conceived of bodily and spiritual unity. So you can't even do it that one time. Now, I want to just follow that up by saying, even if couples do that, because there's a lot of couples I've talked to who didn't know the church said you can't do that, and they decided to do it anyway and have a child anyway. I also want to emphasize you can have complete unity in your marriage except for that one event. And it was an event. It doesn't mean your marriage is broken. It doesn't mean you can't go to confession and ask for forgiveness. It doesn't mean you can't raise your child in love. It means that one time of conceiving that child, very important. The child had a right otherwise. And when I said a while ago that unity gets broken all the time, I'm talking about like women who conceive out of wedlock, teenage mothers who never marry the father, rape cases. There's all kinds of ways where people get pregnant, women get pregnant, and children are brought into existence where there isn't marital, bodily, and spiritual unity. In all of those cases, hope is not lost. So that's why I focus on the hope in the book. If you've denied a child that right, the way you fix it, like any other sin in our lives, is you turn back toward the good. You admit that it was wrong, it wasn't right, the child had a right, and then you work on restoring those rights, and they can be restored. So, turning back toward the good is what I'm hoping in this book. So even if people have used IVF, it's not a condemnation; it's a plea to stop saying that it's okay and don't encourage more people to do it, and ask for forgiveness for what you did, but then move on to focusing on what is good, true, and beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And I think something you said that it's important to underscore is that in no way, by saying that there's a problem with IVF, are we saying that there is a problem with the children who come out of that? Just like there's all those other examples that you gave of being conceived in a way that's sort of less than what would be the ideal or the best circumstances. That doesn't detract from the dignity of the child, and it is in fact the dignity of the child that makes the process problematic in the first place.
Exactly.
So, oh, did you want to say?
No, I agree.
So when we're thinking about all of the embryos, because it never is that simple case, because it's not efficient or financially expedient to do one at a time. So there are many, many, many embryos. Now correct me if I'm wrong, there's like over 1 million in the United States alone that are quote unquote leftovers or just unused, discarded, frozen embryos in limbo. How should we be thinking about these embryos?
Yeah, and just to go back to what you said there, it almost never happens that it's the simple case. I have talked to a couple of people who said that is what they did. You'll be advised against it because it's $20,000 to $30,000 per round, so that's why they want to get multiple embryos.
Right.
And one couple in particular that did it that way, they said it still broke their marriage because it became something that was out of the marital bond, and it became difficult to talk about. It almost became like a point of shame, and they didn't want to talk about it. And so in that way, it did have a lasting impact on the marriage, and that's a real life case there. But you're right, there are over 1 million. The estimates, I was shocked to learn this, the estimates between 1 and 4 million. And that's
Wow.
a huge range. And I was like, why don't we know better between 1 and 4 million? And the answer is they just don't keep very good records. The reporting is not required. And as someone put it to me, we keep better genealogies of livestock than we're doing with children in our country right now. And it's like this in other countries too. But yes, think about that. In our nation, there are some 1 to 4 million embryonic children who are frozen in cryogenic storage. They're still alive, but they're not being allowed to grow and develop normally because honestly, no one wants to raise them. Even the parents who put them there, what they're saying is, we don't want to raise this baby yet. We might want to later. So we're going to put them in the freezer. And I mean, all of us know if they were doing that with 2-year-olds, 2-year-olds are a blessing, but they can be very difficult sometimes. Not
Okay.
but if anybody was freezing them because they're like, oh, we're just not ready yet. We want to wait until we can give them the best possible chance. Nobody would agree that's okay. No, nobody would say, oh, just let's cryogenically store them until you're ready. That's so responsible of you. Nobody would say that. Yet we do this with embryos. These are embryos who are brought into existence, and they are children. I'm sorry if that upsets some people. I say that on purpose because they are children. And then the parents have to make a decision which ones they want to try to implant and raise and which ones they want to save for later. And they even, I'm sure you know, they have techniques now where they can help you pick which ones are healthier or have the traits that you want more. And then you put the others in the cryogenic storage. And they even have contracts I read where the parents can say, well, if we decide we don't want the embryos in 5 years, you can go ahead and donate them to science.
Yeah.
And there's lawsuits where the embryos got thawed out sooner than the couple wanted, and now the couple's suing for wrongful death of a minor. So it's a very confused and mixed up issue in our nation right now, and the last thing we need is more of it.
Yeah. For listeners who want to dive deeper into that sort of eugenic selection, we have a good episode with Emma Waters, who talks about these companies that are essentially just eugenics rebranded with different technology, but assigning scores to the embryos that are to be implanted, and the people who are promoting these technologies believe that it will be unjust not to screen and eliminate defective embryos. So that's an episode that listeners might want to follow
Yeah.
up with. And
Emma
then,
Waters is outstanding. I really appreciate the work she does. Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful. Great interview, as well as everything that she writes. It's just beautiful. And I don't know if you mentioned this already, but I think you put it in the book. One of those complicated cases is custody battles over embryos. So I mean, just another way of pointing out that on the one hand, if the parents feel a certain way, it's wrongful death custody battle, but and yet they are just a clump of cells. They're just embryos, and we can discard them or allow them to be destroyed in the name of a medical advancement if we feel like we don't want them anymore.
Yeah, and it's horrible. And I guess there might be a temptation of people to say, and I'm kind of projecting back to my own days before I was Catholic and before I knew about these issues. I know there's kind of a temptation to just say, well, whatever. It's not that big of a problem, and we'll figure out what to do with those embryos. The reason I got involved in this issue at all, and I think that's where you and I go back, was, the fetal tissue research and also embryonic stem cell research. Because in my mind, okay, if we're going to say it's wrong to use the body parts of aborted children, how's it any different to donate embryos to science? That's
Mhm.
killing the child for the sake of using its entire body or its cells for scientific progress. And
Mhm.
a lot of people don't even know this stuff is happening, and we're heading towards a future, if we're not already there, where you might be accepting some kind of medicine or treatment or
Mhm.
advancement in medical technology that's based on these practices, and you won't even know it.
Mhm.
So, that's something for us to all care about and be concerned about. Not only that, artificial wombs, they use these embryos to try to grow them in the lab. And there's something called the 14-day rule that says you can't grow these embryos in the lab past 14 days, because at that point, their little body starts to differentiate and they start to develop organs. And oh, it's just too much like a baby at that point. But the thing is, they can grow them up to 42 days now. It's possible to do
Mhm.
it. And I fully expect the ethical review boards to say, oh, okay, well, let's change it to the 21-day rule. And if they keep moving back that bar, at some point, the embryo growing in the lab will have established organs and stuff, and it's more viable then. And artificial wombs and children being born who were never in a womb at all is
Mhm.
just over the horizon when we get there. And I know for a fact they're not going to stop trying until they do everything they can to get there.
Yeah, I mean they have already done this technique with in mammals, so it's just a matter of time. I mean, people will object and say, "Oh, that's unrealistic."
It's
I
not.
think it's naive to think that it's not
Mhm.
coming, and probably sooner than we
Mhm.
expect. Thinking about these embryos, and one solution that people have proposed is that it might be possible to rescue them out of their frozen state through what uh, is disputably, arguably called either embryo donation
Mhm.
or embryo adoption, depending on who's
Mhm.
speaking and who is what kind of moral value you assign to the embryo. People will use both terms. The Vatican has said that the situation is a state of injustice that cannot be resolved.
Mhm.
Where do you personally land on the ethics of embryo adoption or donation? What do you think? Knowing that the Vatican has said it can't
Yeah.
be resolved. What do you think?
I think people are trying to figure out what exactly they mean, because it was said to be an unresolvable situation, an absurd fate for these embryos. And a lot of people wonder, well, what do we do then? What is the solution? Can't we just adopt them? And the more I dug into this, I'll tell you, first of all, when I finished writing this part of the book on embryo adoption, I was righteously angry. I
Mm,
was angry. I was like, you know what? How dare people in our nation go out there, use IVF, don't consider if there's another way to conform their lives to God's will. And they put all these embryos in the storage tank. I feel responsible now as a citizen, because I don't want to live in a country where we're having to ask what to do with these children now. I
mm,
found it very just disturbing. I'm in my 50s now. I've got grandchildren. I always wanted to fight for these issues because not on my watch. I don't want to leave this world behind to my kids. I don't want to leave it behind to my grandkids either. And it infuriated me that we have this situation. So what does the church say on embryo adoption? They're still trying to figure it out. The best guidance so far is probably going to seem like a difference without a distinction to some people, but I think it is important. It has to do with intent. So I go into moral decision making. Embryo adoption per se on its face is not immoral, but the intent of it can make it immoral. And so this is a case where the intent makes all the difference. If the intent is that a woman says, I want to, a man and a woman are married and they want to sacrifice themselves to welcome this abandoned embryo and give it life, that is morally good. So if a woman says, I'll allow my womb to be used so that this child can live, and the husband and wife say, we'll raise the child and love it like any other adoption, that's morally good. But if the intent is, and you see this a lot on the internet, especially in Protestant circles, if the intent is to get the baby, if you're just going to use embryo adoption because you want to do IVF, but maybe you don't want to go through the hormone injections, or you don't want to do, if it's just another way to use IVF to get the baby and try to dominate instead of cooperate with God's will through the unity of procreative and unitive aspects of marriage, then it's not okay. So if you're just trying to answer your baby prayer, is not okay. If you're sacrificing your body, it is okay. And the only person that can ever answer that is the person trying to make the decision. However, there is no way there would be enough people who would step forward with the right moral intent to ever solve this problem. An embryo adoption will not get us there. And so we're still left with the issue of this absurd fate where the ones who aren't adopted, then what do you do with them? And I kind of like the idea where someone said, let's just pull the plug and let them all thaw and die and baptize them. I don't like that idea. So that seems like to clean up the mess, but I don't like the idea because the very next day there's going to be new embryos in that freezer.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't know what we do. That's where I am on it. If somebody asks me, I say, if you're thinking about doing it, you have to discern for yourself what your motives are.
Yeah, what some other objections I've heard, even if you could say, okay, it's permissible in and of itself, your intentions are good, but what about all of the children in the world who are already born and living and suffering
Amen.
actively as a result of a lack of a family? And if we're looking at that as a consideration, or about where we can justly allocate our resources, or where God is calling us to direct that love and that passion that we have to want to give a child a home, it seems like it would be more just to direct that energy and attention to a child who's experiencing a great
Mm-hmm.
degree of suffering.
I can definitely see that argument. Yeah, it's 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 a tough one. I mean, my heart kind of breaks about the whole thing, and what you're saying right there, and the arguments that can be made, it gets at what we started talking about in the first place. It really causes you to think about and reevaluate what we mean by saying a child is a gift. And it highlights how far off course we've gotten as a society, that we have all these, in an ideal world, there wouldn't even be children that had to be given up for adoption. And I know we'll never achieve that ideal, but going down the path of IVF even further just puts us further off the path. And you're right. We need to stop going further down the wrong path, try to fix the path, try to find our way back to the right path. And by it, I'm referring to adopting all the children out there who are already experiencing that pain of loss, and try to get back on the track. So, yeah, I'm totally agreeing with what you said.
Yeah. And I guess I could also imagine a possibility where, so it's permissible, the intentions are good, and in good conscience, a couple has prayed about it, consulted their priest, and really feel called, even in light of, that there are many different ways that you could do adoption, even embryo
Mhm.
question aside, and really still feel called to that type of rescue.
Yeah.
Um, but there's still the question of, well, then you are continuing to cooperate with
Yeah.
the fertility industry, and
Yeah.
can we justify that in the name of the good that we're trying to do, or is there
Mhm.
something intrinsic to the risks to the mother, the risks to the child, and to continuing to put money in the pockets of the people who are committing this atrocity? I mean, I
Mhm.
think that I read, I'm not sure if it was in your book, but somewhere, that there are more embryos perishing or frozen from this IVF industry than are aborted every year.
Yeah.
I mean, that scale is just massive.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a mess that we're in, and it raises a lot of questions. That's why I'm grateful to be having the conversation. I try to. I have followed politics for a long time, and I don't. Not only have I never 100% agreed with any politician, I don't think I've ever 100% agreed with any other person in the world. Even my husband and I learned to disagree about things,
Yeah.
and always trying to form an opinion. I'm glad for the conversation in that respect, because I think if Donald Trump continues to push this, it is going to force us to have this conversation
Mm-hmm.
about what you're talking about. There's, look at how many are aborted. Look at how many are killed by IVF or stored by IVF. Look at how many children there are who are out there hurting right now, who need someone to love them. It's a good opportunity to show the rest of our nation and the world why Catholic teaching was right in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of delicacy. You can't say, I told you so. You can't say mother was always right.
Yeah.
You do have to deal with it with some sensitivity, but it's a great opportunity to point out, like, this is what goes wrong when you don't listen to the church in the first place. There is a reason that man's laws should be conformed to God's laws. And this is a case, if we go down this path, we will not be conforming man's law to God's law. We're going to be messing up and making the problem even greater for the next generation. I mean,
Yeah.
we could literally have in the next generation or two people walking around out there who not just foster kids who grew out of the system and nobody ever wanted them. I've talked to kids like that. My daughter works with kids like that. They feel unloved. Why
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't they? Nobody ever took them under their wing and raised them. We could have adults someday walking around who know they were conceived in a lab by no one who loved them at all, even brought them into this world just as a science experiment, raised them to birth, and then stuck them out there in society. And they're going to be walking around not knowing where they belong anywhere. And we know from the revelation of the Holy Trinity, the human person is made to belong, to be loved and known. And I really think it's going to fall to Catholics in that time down the road to show the rest of the world how to love those people too. Okay, here's how we set that right. Here's how you love someone who never knew what it was like to be loved and save them from self-destruction. So, I do think it's a huge problem, and some kind of government program that increased the counts of IVF in our nation would be such a bad decision in so many ways.
Yeah, I think you've really highlighted why it is important to have a national conversation about IVF, that the kinds of things that are troubling are not just troubling for Catholics or
Mhm.
Christians more broadly, but should trouble us as human beings.
Yeah.
Would you go a little bit more deeply into the five principles that you articulate in the book? And so how can these principles enlighten us as we continue to think about these questions?
Yeah, I like lists of things. I'm very left-brained. They even told me when I'm writing the book, like, that's enough with the philosophy and theology. You need to put some stories and stuff into it. And I do think as a mother, I think mothers tend to be good at doing that kind of thing. Here's your list. Here's your teaching. Now here's how it looks like in real life. But I like this list of 5 things, and it came from Joseph Boyle in a 1988. That's a year after Dawnum Vitae article in the Linacre Quarterly. And it's a paragraph he has in his article that listed the 5 main points from Dawnum Vitae. And I thought, well, that'd be neat to turn it into 5 principles,
Yeah.
just so we can remember them. And they build on each other. So I'll just go through them real quick. The principle of existence is the principle that humans are made in the image and likeness of the one and triune God, and that God grants the existence of each one of us, conception and throughout life. So I go through in the book why it's so important to teach people God exists, but not just God, but God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, because it's from that revelation that we came to understand our own human dignity, our spiritual powers of intellect and will. Okay, and that's a very important thing to learn in any bioethical question. But from that comes the principle of totality, that the human person is one total being of body and rational soul. So we're not just atoms and molecules. We have body, and we are body and soul. And from that flows the principle of dignity, the third one. Every living human should be treated then with the full respect due a person, and not as an object or means to an end. Those embryos, as well as anyone else, don't treat people like objects. Treat them with dignity, because they are body and rational soul, made in the image and likeness of God. And then from that comes the fourth one, that principle of procreation, that procreation has to be done in conformity with the dignity of the person. And that means that procreation takes place only within the integral self-giving of marital intercourse. And from that comes that last principle of inseparability. Lovemaking and life-giving can't be artificially dissociated in the act of the spousal union. And I think if you can just remember those things, those 5 points, that gives you a way to sort of build through the argument if you encounter someone who doesn't know what any of that means. Because it's the kind of thing that strikes a chord in your heart. When you hear it, you're like, yeah, I'm more than just my particles. It speaks to all of us. I had a right to be born of that kind of love. I had a right to be loved like that as a child. And it changes the way you look at your fellow man then too.
You know, what's interesting about the list of principles is I think that the least obvious to us in practice is and maybe I disagree, we have a conversation about that, but I think it's number 2. I think it's the principle of totality, that I don't just have a body, but I am my body. I think that even a Christian who's looking at the list and agrees with everything might be operating implicitly on this idea that we are a soul, our body, we inhabit our body. Like we could, if it were possible, it would be fine to like Freaky Friday ourselves into a different body, and it wouldn't be something substantially different than me, because me is my mind and how I think and function, and my body is something else. And that's why we have people who think I can do any number of interventions to myself to change my physical appearance, or people are talking about uploading consciousness into humanoid robots and things like that, which is obviously very far-fetched at this point, at least thank God for that. But the idea of it being potentially a good thing is just this separation that we have from our bodies. And so why does it matter that we have a bodily union to result in the conception of our child? This is just another way of making that happen. I think that's how a lot of people think about our bodies these days. They're just I think Mary Harrington calls it meat Lego Gnosticism. This idea we can rearrange our flesh any way that we wish because it's irrelevant to us. Is there more to be said about that?
I completely agree. And as someone like you that deals with a lot of bioethical issues, I've written this somewhere. I can't remember. It might have been the 20-question bioethics that I did for Catholic Answers. But when you think about it, every bioethical question there is comes down to that. It comes down to this misunderstanding of what it means to say that we are body and soul united. Thank you, Descartes and dualism. A lot of people think that way, don't understand who Descartes is and what dualism is. I got my PhD in chemistry and wasn't Catholic, and it's taken me years. I still struggle with it, not to think of myself as atoms and molecules, not to think of myself as a body, and then now I'm Catholic, and now I know that I have a soul. Like it's taken me years to understand matter and form. And it's not something that's taught in the schools. It's not something that's assumed in chemistry textbooks for junior high students. It's it's every level of our society. There is this idea that body is one thing, and if you believe in that kind of stuff, soul and consciousness are another thing.
Right.
And it's really confusing because everybody wants to separate those things until it comes to yourself, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm more than my part. I mean, that was for me when I was converting. I had to get my head around that question: am I more than particles? And
Yeah.
if I am, what does that mean I am? And it was very much a self-discovery kind of path. And I want that for other people because it's wonderful when you know those things.
Yeah, and there's sort of two ways to approach it. Like you said, there's the pure materialist, like I am just my particles, I am just an animal, I'm
Mhm.
acting
Mhm.
out of the processes of evolution, and I'm just my
Mhm.
biology. And then there's other people who say, no, you have that, the materialist, and then there's the spiritual or consciousness part. It's much harder to apprehend the truth of the situation with those two things are fused. They're not separable. We've already discussed the simple case, the straightforward example where an intended mother and father conceive one embryo and everything is goes according to plan.
Mhm.
But you also share in the book a lot of sort of harrowing, complex situations that in the not so simple cases. Can
Mhm.
you explain a little bit about what IVF introduces uh,
Yeah.
that might be problematic for these fundamental relationships of marriage and parenthood?
Yeah, these stories were heartbreaking. I mean, the one I already referenced, where the couple said it caused problems in their marriage that went beyond just that one act. There's that, but there's another woman I talked to. She had used a donor egg because she said what happens when you get in this, when the doctors tell you that you're infertile, there's this assumption then that you're broken. And
Mm,
what are the doctors going to do? They're going to fix it. And so you get into this tunnel of IVF and they don't ever stop to ask, is there another way?
mm,
They, like you would in fertility care, but they
right.
say, okay, we have to try this. We have to try this, the next treatment, the next treatment. So the doctors told her, you need to use a donor egg because your eggs are very weak. And so she agreed to it, thinking I'm doing the next thing the doctor tells me to do without really thinking through what that actually means. And so they agreed to use donor eggs, and her husband provided the sperm. And, if you don't know how that's done, that it's done sinfully too. I mean, the husband has to masturbate. And they got the sperm and then they had their children. But she was telling me 12 years later, with two children by IVF this way, that decision to do that twice, they got the children that they wanted and they love them dearly. And so she even feels guilty. She was anonymous because she even feels guilty saying this. Again, it's not the children, it's that what happened was when they did that, not only did it cause financial hardship for her and her husband, now they have these two babies and it hit them later. They're going to have to tell these children that she's not their real biological mother. They need to know that.
Yeah.
They had embryos in the freezer. They didn't know how to talk about it because, oh, you've got the baby's in your arms, you're raising the baby. Then it sets in, I have embryos in the freezer. What do you do now? What do you do with them? And so what happened in her marriage, she said, over those 12 years was it was one thing after another. It put a wall up between her and her husband. They didn't want to talk about the donor eggs. They didn't want to talk about the finances. They didn't want to talk about the embryos in the freezer. They didn't want to talk about the masturbation and the egg cycles and all of that. And so it was just one thing after another that she said broke their marriage. They white knuckled it. They got through it. They're still together. But she said, my biggest fear now is that these beautiful children we've raised don't even know what a healthy marriage looks like because they've never seen one. And now it's going to go into the next generation. And her heart was broken talking about this because at the time I'm talking to her, she has no idea how she's going to get out of this situation. It's too
Mm,
much. And my husband and I have been married for 22 years. I was a messy convert. I was able to, encourage her that you can get past all of that. You just have to start talking about it with therapy. There is definitely healing. But she said that the anonymous name she wanted to use was Angela because she wanted it to be a message from the Lord, like an angel.
mm,
She wishes somebody had told her these things. She
yeah.
wishes somebody had given her a bigger picture about what she was doing. And so she's telling her story for that reason, which I thought was very, very courageous. And that's just one story. There's other stories I got from the literature two Catholic sisters. They grew up Catholic. They turned away from their faith, used birth control for 10, 20 years in their marriages. They didn't want any kids. What do you call that? Dual incomes and no dinks. Yeah. And living the life. Well, then they decide for one of the sisters, she decided she wanted to have kids, and she wasn't pregnant a few months later, and she concluded that she was infertile. Coming off of birth control after all that time, 2 months later, oh well, I must be infertile. But she wasn't infertile. But anyway, she went through IVF and all the expense, multiple trials, things, miscarriages,
I
surgery.
cannot believe a doctor would, in good conscience, even offer IVF to somebody who had only been trying for 2 months.
It is bewildering how. That's why it's such big pharma they pull it into. But this woman, the first sister, she went through all of this to have that one baby, and then she says, because I was so happy with my one baby, I conceived a few months later. She started her period right after that child was born, and they conceived naturally right after that. And so, I mean, yeah, why didn't the doctor look at her and say, you were never infertile?
Yeah,
Because
no
she
kidding.
wasn't. And they have like 4 children now. So she never was infertile. Um, I just don't get it. And it makes me really happy for the fertility care, because that way of approaching questions about your fertility and anything else, female health, it's to understand the whole person and to take your
Mhm.
time and to try to understand what the body is telling you before you make any intervention type decisions. And we need more of that. So
Mhm.
there's other stories too. I mean, it was, again, I got through all of that. Then I got to the embryo adoption part. I was so angry when I finished writing the book. Like, how did we get here?
Yeah, it's so hard. Um, I want to go back to Angela's story because I think that hearing her experience and her voice, and that now she wishes somebody had shared the truth with her, um, that provides a really good framework
Mhm.
for those of us who are opponents of IVF to think about how do we speak the truth in this area without alienating or shaming people who are suffering. It's a real loss to be struggling in with
Mhm.
infertility. But even before we talk about how do we speak the truth, just understanding Angela's story and knowing why we should be speaking the truth in the first place. Because I think even if you do like the very best of intention, the very best execution, you
Yeah.
might still end up alienating or making
Yeah.
somebody feel shame. You can't control all of those things. That's more
Yeah.
than you're capable of.
Mhm.
But I think the fear of that outcome prevents so many people from speaking to the women who, like Angela, would desperately have wanted to hear that information, and feel, I don't know, betrayed or just
Mhm.
sad at a loss, like looking to those of us who have that information to share and thinking, why didn't somebody speak up? And
Mhm.
that's hugely important. So setting that as our paradigm for thinking about why
Mhm.
we need to be doing this, how do we
Yeah.
go about, what's the best way to talk to people about these issues?
And that gets at a deep question about evangelization in general. Like, how do we evangelize from a place of love. We want people to be happy. Even as a mother, I've got grown children mostly now, and I want them to be happy. And you have to respect their free will the same way God respects all of our free will, and let them go at some point, knowing they're watching them make mistakes and things they're going to have to clean up and fix later. I've been doing that for a while now. My oldest is 36, and I've seen so many of my children come back around. But my point is, I've learned, the chemist in me wants to control things, because chemists control atoms and molecules. That's what we do. And if people are just atoms and molecules, you think you can control people. And I was a control freak for that reason. I've learned to understand why I have that urge to try to control things and just to let go. And to be able to let go, you have to be saying constantly, God, what do you want me to do in this situation? What do you want me to do? You have to constantly be casting that net, trying to conform your will to God's will. So the reason I wrote the book in the way I did, it's got the logical 10-step argument based on church teaching and theology and philosophy rich. It's got list of things. It's got scientific data. It's got all of this stuff that you can take the emotion out and just use that as you need to for people. I also talk in the book about what it means to evangelize and meet someone where they are. You're not going to be successful if you go up to a hurting person who's devastated about infertility and say, let me give you the 10-step argument. They're not going to listen. But you need to understand, we have to understand the 10-step argument and the list of principles and where the church says what. We need to understand the deeper arguments so that we have the tools in our own intellect that we can listen and decide and pick. Moms do this all the time. I'm going to pick from my bag of tools the advice that we need right now. And even sometimes it allows you just to listen. Like, listening is so powerful. And I wasn't always a good listener, but listen to somebody tell you what they're thinking. I mean, if it's a woman who has had an abortion, or a woman who used IVF, they need to verbalize what's going on in their heads. They need to release that. And it's very powerful when someone who has all of this knowledge inside is able just to listen, because I do believe if you add to that the grace of Christ, because you're praying while the person's talking, you will be given the words that you need to say whatever is going to put that other person on the path to healing. Joseph Pieper says it best. He says that you can't force somebody else to practice virtue. The only way you can influence another person to practice virtue and choose the good is to get as close to the inside of that person as you can. Get as intimate with that person as you can so that you can look out at the world through that person's eyes. And so he doesn't mean crawl inside their body, but he means listen and unite body and soul with a friend in the spirit of friendship, in the spirit of love, and willing the good of the other. So I tried to put that all throughout the book. Here's your left brain stuff, but you need to pack that in, and then you got to be really right brain when you're talking to people, if that's the right terminology. It's how I think about it.
No,
When I
you're
got married,
100%
I liked the theology that helped me change my mind.
Yeah, I think that it is really brilliantly laid out in giving people the exact, the logic, the theology, and then also making it very human. Um, and just on the point of going in somebody's door and listening and being with them, I was discerning this particular question in my motherhood, and unsolicited motherhood advice of any kind, like whether it's IVF or not, is hard to receive,
Yep.
and hard to give to another mom gracefully. And so I was sharing this with a friend, and she listened to all the stuff, and I was saying, I think this thing is just not working out, and whatever else I said, and she said, well, maybe there's a reason for that. And that's literally the only input she gave was like, maybe there's a reason for that. And then I ended up thinking on what she said, and coming to listening to my own voice, but then her giving me permission to say no to this thing. And she didn't come at me with like, no, you shouldn't be doing it this way, or I did it this way, or anything like that. It was just like the listening and being with me in that question. And then a really gentle, maybe there's a reason for that. So I think you're right. Like, the Holy Spirit does give us the words to say, and as long as we are present to that and praying for that, we can surrender to that too. Because I've also had instances where speaking up has ended friendships, not through any intention of my own, or even any real aggression on my side or anything like that. It's just relationships are a two-way street, and
Yep.
I,
Yeah.
I still hope and pray that, as long as life continues, that it's not over yet. So
Yeah.
perhaps we'll be reconciled at some point in the future also. So all that having been said, I would love to ask you the standard concluding question for
Mhm.
all our interviews going forward. Who is one person, dead or alive, real or fictional, who you believe exemplifies the best of what it means to be human?
Who exemplifies the best of what it means to be human? That's a big question.
It is.
Um, I think I would say my mother. Trying to get my head around IVF and the whole thing where we all have the right to be born of perfect love, and trying to my mother. I mean, my mother is not Catholic, but she raised me to love Jesus. I rebelled against her when I was dumb and young, and I went my own way with chemistry and science and whatever. And she's just taught me over and over again, coming back to just the humble and simple truths.
Mm.
Um, that she is. I've seen her age now. That's you see a body change throughout lifetime. I've seen her age up to almost 80s now, and I've watched her do that. So she is clearly more than just her body, because her body's changed an awful lot in the time I've known her. But she's still that person, and what I see in her now, and I hope my kids come to see me in the same kind of way. I see the pains in her from her childhood that she never could quite find peace with. I see the insecurities that she had as a mother all along and still has, as she worries about her children who are now grandparents. And I see that love in her mother's heart to just always keep trying to show. She'll just tell me things like family is everything. And for so many years, I thought I was so smart with my chemistry and my degrees, but I keep coming back to those things that she said, that family is everything. I mean, that is what the Holy Spirit revealed to us. I mean, that's what Christ revealed to us in the Holy Trinity, that we're made for that kind of belonging. So, even in my own life, I moved away for many years, and she was upset because I went off to college and didn't want to be home. We moved back to Texas 9 years ago, and we've been here ever since. As coming home, I was the prodigal child. So, yeah, I would have to say my mother.
Yeah, beautiful. That simple wisdom, it's hard to beat. It makes me think of Saint Therese. She's the doctor of the church, but
Yeah.
no big education, just knowing the wisdom of the Holy Spirit in your heart. So
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you.
It's a great,
Sorry.
that's a great question.
Yeah, it's a hard one to think of on the spot for sure.
Yeah.
So where can listeners connect with you, find your work, and buy the book?
Okay. Well, I used to have a website. I got tired of paying for it and maintaining it, so I canceled it. And now I just have a Substack, which I really like. I know you have one too, and I love your Substack. I really like what they're doing. So I put everything into Substack now. And online, you can find my writing and my books, and where I work as a professor. You can find all of that if you even come close to spelling my name right, because it's a very unique name. It's hard for people to spell, but I have an online presence. So if you just search my name or ask AI about it, you'll find my Substack and the books and things that I've written.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. God bless you and your book, and get this message out to the people who need it.
Bless you.
If this episode raised questions or sparked thoughts you'd like to explore further, I'd love to continue the conversation with you over on Substack at bravenewus.substack.com. Your comments and insights there help to build the kind of thoughtful community this show was made for. To support Brave New Us, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, or become a paid subscriber on Substack. Your support makes it possible to keep bringing you these ad-free episodes. Thank you for listening and being part of the journey into what it means to be human in the age of biotechnology.